When you think of medieval cities, your mind probably jumps to castles, marketplaces, or maybe grimy streets. But lurking behind the walls of many towns was a more clandestine, yet surprisingly organized world, the medieval brothel. Unlike the chaotic, romanticized portrayals in movies or novels, these establishments operated under rules, oversight, and social negotiation, blending commerce, morality, and survival in fascinating ways. Brothels were legal in many parts of Europe, though attitudes varied by region and era. Cities such as Paris, London, and Venice often tolerated or even regulated them, recognizing that suppressing prostitution entirely was impractical. Authorities understood that women providing sexual services were part of the urban economy, and trying to eliminate the trade could lead to disorder, public health issues, or unregulated activity that was harder to control. One of the first things visitors or historians notice is the strict rules governing conduct. Brothel owners and workers operated under regulations set by city councils, guilds, or religious authorities. Rules might dictate opening hours, fees, client behavior, hygiene standards, and even signage. For example, in Paris, women working in brothels were sometimes required to wear distinctive clothing so that clients and officials could identify them, while also ensuring that respectable citizens could avoid unwanted encounters. Hygiene was surprisingly emphasized. Though medieval sanitation had limits, brothel operators often insisted on regular bathing, clean bedding, and even herbal remedies to reduce disease transmission. This wasn't just for morality, it was practical. Ill workers or clients could disrupt business and attract legal scrutiny. Brothels sometimes worked with local physicians to manage outbreaks of venereal diseases, making them early examples of a regulated health-focused industry. The financial side of brothel life was also highly structured. Women typically paid a portion of their earnings to the madam or owner, who provided room, food, and protection. Some cities even levied taxes specifically on brothels, creating a revenue stream for municipal governments. In return, authorities granted protection from harassment, legal support, and sometimes limits on competition, formalizing a business model centuries before modern entertainment industries. But rules weren't limited to operations, they also applied to clients. Men visiting brothels were expected to behave within social norms, avoid violence, and sometimes adhere to specific pricing or payment structures. Breaking the rules could lead to fines, public shaming, or even arrest. In this sense, brothels were not anarchic pleasure zones, they were microcosms of medieval social order, balancing desire, law, and commerce. Brothels also played a role in social and moral management. Authorities often saw them as outlets that could prevent greater moral chaos, reducing illicit encounters in streets or forests, which were harder to regulate and more dangerous. In some cities, madams were required to report criminal activity, observe local curfews, or maintain records, acting as informal agents of civic oversight. Finally, brothels were spaces of negotiation and survival for the women who worked there. While working in a regulated brothel did not guarantee safety or wealth, it offered relative security, a community of peers, and a measure of control over daily life. Women had to navigate rules, clients, disease, and social stigma, demonstrating skill, resilience, and business acumen that history often overlooks. In conclusion, medieval brothels were complex institutions blending commerce, law, morality, and survival. They were regulated, structured, and surprisingly sophisticated, contradicting the myth of unchecked chaos. Far from being mere dens of sin, these establishments reflected the ingenuity, negotiation, and pragmatism of medieval urban life. Next, we'll explore the women themselves, their roles, routines, and strategies for survival, revealing the human stories behind the rules and walls. While the rules and regulations set the framework, the real story of medieval brothels lies in the women who worked within them. These women navigated a complex world of labor, survival, and social negotiation, balancing personal agency with the constraints imposed by society, law, and health concerns. In this chapter, we explore their daily routines, challenges, and strategies for maintaining both livelihood and dignity. First, it's important to understand that not all women came to brothels by choice. Some were voluntary workers, seeking economic independence or escape from rural poverty, while others were forced by family pressure, trafficking, or circumstances beyond their control. The spectrum of agency was wide. Some women leveraged brothel work as a stepping stone to relative financial autonomy, while others endured it as a necessity. The daily life of a worker was structured, repetitive, and physically demanding. Women typically woke early to prepare themselves and the rooms for clients. Hygiene, though limited by medieval standards, was emphasized. Baths, clean linen, and sometimes herbal treatments were required to maintain health and attractiveness. Appearance mattered, as clothing and grooming could signal status, skill, or specialization. Some cities mandated distinctive attire to identify brothel workers, a rule that simultaneously protected them from harassment and reinforced social hierarchy. Work itself was both negotiated and regulated. Clients had to follow rules, and women often had the authority to enforce boundaries, what today we might call consent. Though framed within medieval expectations, the madam or owner oversaw these interactions, ensuring payment, safety, and adherence to city regulations. In many cases, women could refuse a client or set terms for service, demonstrating negotiation skills and personal agency often overlooked in historical narratives. Beyond client interaction, women managed financial, social, and legal aspects of their work. A portion of earnings went to the madam or brothel owner, but savvy workers could save, invest, or use resources to secure temporary independence. Some women maintained networks with other workers, sharing tips, warning each other of dangerous clients, or collectively advocating for safer working conditions. In this sense, brothels could foster communities of solidarity, despite the stigmatization imposed by broader society. Health risks were significant. Sexually transmitted infections, physical injury, and mental strain were constant threats. Medieval physicians and apothecaries sometimes provided treatments, though remedies were rudimentary and often ineffective. Women developed personal strategies to mitigate risk. Herbal prophylactics, hygiene rituals, and selective client choice were common. Those who survived years in the trade often became highly skilled in risk management and self-preservation. Interestingly, brothel life also included roles beyond direct client interaction. Women could work as cleaners, cooks, or administrators within the brothel, managing rooms, accounts, or supply chains. Some acted as intermediaries, mentoring newcomers, or negotiating with city officials. These secondary roles highlight that medieval brothels were not chaotic dens, but complex institutions requiring organization, skill, and adaptability. Social perception added another layer of complexity. Brothel workers were stigmatized, yet tolerated, often seen as necessary evils. Their interactions with clergy, authorities, and citizens required careful negotiation. In some cities, women were expected to attend church, confess regularly, or adhere to curfews, Blending moral oversight with practical regulation, they constantly balance survival, reputation, and compliance with rules imposed by both society and the brothel itself. Finally, we must recognize the resilience and ingenuity of these women. Working in brothels demanded physical stamina, mental acuity, negotiation skills, and community awareness. Despite danger, social stigma, and disease, many women carved out spaces of autonomy, security, and even opportunity within a restrictive society. Their stories challenge simplified narratives of medieval women as passive or powerless, revealing instead active participants in a regulated, high-stakes economy. In conclusion, the women of medieval brothels were not merely passive figures, they were negotiators, strategists, and skilled laborers navigating a structured, regulated, and often dangerous environment. They balanced social expectations, personal safety, and economic survival, demonstrating a resilience and agency often overlooked by history. Next, we'll examine the city authorities, madams, and the legal framework that regulated brothels, exploring how medieval governments sought to control morality, protect citizens, and profit from vice, while the women within brothels navigated their daily lives with skill and resilience. The brothel system itself depended on oversight, regulation, and negotiation with city authorities. In this chapter, we explore the madams who ran these establishments, the legal frameworks governing them, and the curious ways medieval governments balanced morality, economy, and public order. At the center of every brothel was the madam, the woman responsible for management, enforcement of rules, and often the well-being of workers. Madams were essentially entrepreneurs operating under strict legal and social constraints. They collected payments from clients, allocated rooms, ensured hygiene, and sometimes mediated disputes between clients and workers. In larger cities, successful madams could amass significant influence and wealth, wielding power over both the workforce and their clientele. Madams also functioned as intermediaries with city authorities. Brothels were often licensed or tolerated by local governments, and madams were responsible for ensuring compliance with regulations. This could include maintaining records of clients, ensuring workers wore proper identifying clothing, and reporting criminal activity observed within the establishment. In some cities, madams were required to pay taxes or fees, effectively making brothels a source of revenue for municipal coffers. Legal regulation varied across regions. In Paris, for example, brothels were officially licensed and closely monitored by city officials. Records from the 13th and 14th centuries show rules regarding hours of operation, pricing, worker identification, and sanitation. Similar systems existed in London, Venice, and parts of Germany. Officials recognized that trying to ban prostitution outright would drive it underground, making it harder to manage public health, morality, and taxation. Interestingly, the law sometimes prescribed moral oversight as well. Brothels were expected to limit interactions with minors, prevent public drunkenness, and discourage violence within their walls. Clergy often monitored these establishments indirectly, ensuring that religious norms were not flagrantly violated. Madams had to navigate this delicate balance, running a profitable business while staying on the right side of both civil and religious authorities. City councils also intervened when brothels violated rules or caused disturbances. Fines, temporary closures, or even public shaming could result from neglecting hygiene, overcharging clients, or allowing illegal activity. In some cases, disputes between brothels or between a brothel and a neighboring establishment were settled in court, emphasizing that medieval cities treated these operations as legitimate institutions with obligations and consequences. Madams often develop sophisticated strategies to comply with law while maximizing profit. They managed worker schedules, negotiated with authorities, and sometimes influenced local politics through discreet alliances. The position required intelligence, diplomacy, and risk management skills often underestimated when people think about the medieval sex trade. Far from chaotic or purely exploitative, brothels operated under complex internal and external hierarchies, balancing commerce, safety, and social norms. Brothel regulation also intersected with health concerns, as disease could spread rapidly in dense urban populations. Authorities occasionally collaborated with physicians to implement measures aimed at reducing venereal disease, from mandating herbal remedies and baths to inspecting facilities. While medical knowledge was rudimentary, these efforts reflect an early form of public health intervention within a commercial context. Finally, madams often acted as protectors of their workers by negotiating rules with city officials, enforcing order, and providing basic support. They offered a measure of safety that individual women could not achieve alone. This sense of communal oversight helped prevent exploitation, abuse, and chaos, making brothels structured, regulated, and surprisingly resilient institutions in a morally complex society. In conclusion, the regulation of medieval brothels highlights a society that was pragmatic, hierarchical, and highly organized. Madams were central figures, balancing commerce, law, morality, and worker welfare. City authorities tolerated and managed these establishments, ensuring they served both public order and economic function. Far from lawless dens of vice, medieval brothels were microcosms of regulation, negotiation, and social complexity. Next, we'll examine the rules for clients, exploring what was expected, forbidden, and enforceable in these regulated houses of pleasure, and how medieval men navigated a surprisingly complex system of conduct. While madams and women workers navigated the complexities of running and surviving in brothels, clients were also subject to a surprisingly detailed set of rules. Medieval authorities recognized that controlling male behavior was crucial for public order, hygiene, and the financial stability of these establishments. In this chapter, we explore what men could and could not do in brothels, revealing a society that attempted to regulate desire with laws, etiquette, and social expectation. First, let's consider the basic legal framework. Clients were expected to pay for services fairly, without haggling excessively or refusing to honor agreed-upon fees. In some cities, official price lists were posted, specifying fees for different types of services, durations, and even amenities like food or lodging. Overcharging or underpaying could lead to fines or public shaming, demonstrating that medieval society sought accountability for both sides of the transaction. Violence or aggression was another key concern. Clients were forbidden from physically harming women or disrupting the brothel's operation. Any such behavior could result in fines, imprisonment, or temporary closure of the brothel. In practice, madams acted as enforcers, monitoring behavior and sometimes calling on city officials if rules were broken. This created a system where clients had to respect boundaries and social norms, or face tangible consequences. Interestingly, some regulations were surprisingly detailed. In Paris, for example, men could be fined for visiting brothels in inappropriate attire, bringing weapons, or entering during restricted hours. These rules reflect a broader concern with urban order. Authorities wanted to maintain decorum, reduce public disorder, and prevent crime linked to brothel activity. Clients were expected to navigate a legal, social, and moral maze, an early form of consumer etiquette. Hygiene rules extended to clients as well. In some cities, men were expected to wash before entering, avoid bringing contagious disease, or refrain from visiting if ill. While enforcement varied, this reflects an understanding that disease could spread rapidly in densely populated urban centers, and that controlling behavior within brothels was both a moral and practical concern. Clients were also expected to respect the hierarchy and routines of the brothel. Women had their schedules and rules. Madams maintained order rooms were often assigned in advance. Attempting to circumvent the system, such as sneaking in without payment, coercing workers, or breaking curfew, was considered a serious violation. In extreme cases, clients could be banned from the establishment or reported to authorities, showing that medieval brothels functioned as organized, rule-bound institutions. Social norms also shaped behavior. Men visiting brothels were often expected to avoid public displays of debauchery, maintain discretion, and refrain from excessive drunkenness or noise. This was particularly important in towns with active clergy, city councils, or tightly packed neighborhoods. Brothels operated within communities, and client behavior was crucial to maintaining a delicate balance between vice and civility. Some cities implemented morality patrols or inspections, ensuring that clients complied with local rules. These could include verifying fees, monitoring hours, or even observing interactions between workers and patrons. In effect, medieval authorities treated clients as accountable participants in a regulated economy, rather than as free agents pursuing personal pleasure without consequence. Finally, clients' interactions could influence the social standing of workers and madams. Respectful behavior, punctual payment, and adherence to rules enhanced the reputation of the brothel, attracting more clientele and improving the livelihood of workers. Conversely, unruly or disrespectful patrons could provoke conflict, fines, or reputational damage, showing that even men had to navigate a structured social and commercial environment. In conclusion, rules for clients in medieval brothels were complex, practical, and socially enforced. Men had to navigate payment, etiquette, hygiene, and behavior within a highly regulated system designed to balance morality, commerce, and public order. Far from chaotic pleasure houses, brothels were spaces where desire, law, and social expectation intersected, and where both workers and clients operated under carefully negotiated rules. Next, we'll explore the economics of brothels, including fees, taxation, and the financial relationships that shaped this hidden yet essential part of medieval urban life. Brothels weren't just centers of pleasure, they were well-organized businesses embedded in the urban economy. Behind the walls of velvet curtains and candlelit rooms, a complex system of fees, payments, and taxation governed operations. In this chapter, we'll explore the financial side of medieval brothels, revealing a world where commerce, regulation, and survival intersected in fascinating ways. First, let's talk about payment structures. Clients typically paid per visit or per service, often following official pricing guidelines established by city authorities. Fees could vary based on service type, time spent, the experience of the worker, and even special requests. In some cities, brothels posted price lists publicly, while in others, madams negotiated discreetly. Fair payment was enforced through a combination of social expectation, madam oversight, and legal consequences. Failure to pay could result in fines, public shaming, or even arrest, illustrating that medieval commerce had teeth. Workers themselves often had to give a portion of their earnings to the madam, who provided rooms, food, protection, and management. This arrangement is sometimes misunderstood as exploitation, but it was also a practical system. Women gained relative safety, structure, and access to clients, while madams could maintain the brothel's operation and compliance with regulations. The balance of profit sharing required negotiation, diplomacy, and careful bookkeeping, a medieval form of business management. Brothels were also taxed by local authorities, generating revenue for towns and cities. For example, in 14th century Paris and London, municipal governments levied taxes on both brothel income and the licensing of establishments. These taxes were significant, creating incentives for city officials to monitor, regulate, and protect brothels, rather than suppress them entirely. In a sense, brothels were not only tolerated, but institutionalized contributors to the urban economy. Another economic factor was supply and maintenance costs. Brothels required furniture, bedding, cleaning supplies, food, and candles. Madams managed these logistics, sometimes negotiating with local merchants for discounts or bulk purchases. They also coordinated repairs, security, and entertainment, demonstrating that running a brothel was a complex managerial task that went far beyond simple transactional work. Interestingly, some workers leveraged their position for a financial independence or investment. Experienced women could save money, acquire property, or even start small businesses once they left the trade. Others lent money or resources to colleagues, creating informal financial networks within the brothel. This underscores that medieval brothel work, while stigmatized, also offered opportunities for strategic economic agency. The economics of brothels also intersected with social hierarchies. Nobles, merchants, and even clergy occasionally interacted with these establishments, and their payments, patronage, or protection could influence the financial success of a brothel. Madams had to manage these relationships carefully, balancing discretion, diplomacy, and economic interests. Reputation mattered. A well-run, respected brothel attracted more clients and commanded higher fees. Finally, the financial aspect reinforced legal and social structures. Clients paid for services according to rules. Workers contributed to household management. Madams ensured compliance and profitability. Authorities collected taxes and monitored regulation. Money flowed in multiple directions, linking pleasure, labor, and governance into a cohesive, though morally complex, economic system. In conclusion, medieval brothels were not chaotic dens of indulgence. They were regulated businesses, embedded in urban economies, with structured payments, taxation, and managerial oversight. The interplay of money, rules, and social negotiation made them surprisingly sophisticated institutions, demonstrating that even in a morally complex sector, organization, strategy, and financial acumen were essential. Next, we'll explore the tools, spaces, and daily routines that kept brothels functioning, including hygiene practices, room arrangements, and how these establishments maintained order amidst chaos. We've explored the women, the madams, the clients, and the economics of medieval brothels. Now, let's step inside the walls and examine the practical day-to-day functioning of these establishments. The rooms, the routines, the hygiene practices, and the ways order was maintained amidst a chaotic, high-stakes environment. First, the physical layout. Brothels range from modest houses with a few rooms to larger, multi-story establishments with dozens of private chambers. Bedrooms were small but carefully arranged, often equipped with clean bedding, candles, and minimal furniture. Some wealthier brothels even had separate spaces for dining, entertaining, or administrative work. Privacy and safety were essential. Clients needed discretion, and workers required space to manage hygiene, clothing, and personal matters. Hygiene, surprisingly, was a significant concern. Medieval authorities and madams recognized that illness could devastate both staff and profits. Workers were encouraged or sometimes mandated to bathe regularly, wash bedding, and use herbal remedies to prevent infections. Herbs like rosemary, sage, or thyme were common, either for fragrance, cleansing, or supposed antiseptic properties. While these measures were rudimentary by modern standards, they reflect a pragmatic approach to health in an era without germ theory. The daily routine was structured yet demanding. Workers often began their day cleaning rooms, preparing bedding, and readying themselves for clients. Meals were modest but sufficient to sustain long hours, and breaks were rare. Each interaction required mental focus, physical stamina, and emotional resilience, as workers had to manage client expectations, adhere to rules, and maintain personal safety. Madams oversaw the schedule, ensuring a balance between client demand and worker well-being, sometimes even rotating rooms or shifts to prevent exhaustion. Security and order were constant concerns. Brothels often employed guards or assistants to monitor entrances, handle disputes, and prevent theft. The madam acted as both manager and mediator, addressing complaints, enforcing rules, and negotiating with clients or authorities when necessary. This structure ensured that, despite the often chaotic atmosphere, brothels operated as functional, controlled environments rather than anarchic dens of vice. Rooms themselves were adapted for function and comfort. Bedding was regularly changed and sometimes sanitized with boiling water or herbs. Furniture was minimal, but carefully arranged to maximize space and allow smooth interaction between clients and workers. Some brothels displayed visual cues for etiquette, such as designated areas for waiting, seating arrangements, or signage indicating services and pricing. This created a semi-formal system that guided behavior and reduced potential conflicts. In addition to physical care, emotional and social management was vital. Workers often supported each other, sharing advice on dealing with difficult clients or city officials. Madams sometimes acted as counselors, helping workers navigate social stigma, personal disputes, or legal complications. The brothel, in this sense, was not only a workplace, but also a micro-community with social hierarchies, norms, and mutual support. Hygiene extended beyond the rooms to the broader building. Floors were swept, latrines cleaned, and waste managed according to city ordinances. In some regions, brothels were inspected by municipal authorities to ensure compliance with cleanliness and safety standards. This regular oversight demonstrates the structured and regulated nature of brothel life, countering the myth of unchecked filth and chaos. Finally, the interplay of routine, space, hygiene, and social management reveals that medieval brothels were highly organized institutions. Workers navigated physical, emotional, and social demands. Madams maintained order, safety, and profitability. Clients followed rules and etiquette, and authorities monitored compliance. The combination of these factors allowed brothels to function efficiently, providing both pleasure and stability within a complex urban ecosystem. In conclusion, life inside a medieval brothel required discipline, organization, and resilience. From room arrangements and hygiene practices to daily routines and social structures, these establishments operated as regulated, functioning businesses, balancing client satisfaction with worker safety and city regulations. Despite societal stigma, brothels exemplified the medieval ability to manage complex systems of commerce, law, and human interaction. Next, we'll explore the darker aspects of brothel life, including disease, punishment, and the challenges workers faced in maintaining both health and personal safety within these confined worlds. While medieval brothels were organized, regulated, and surprisingly sophisticated, they were not without danger. Behind the curtains and rules lay risks that workers and clients alike had to navigate daily. From disease to punishment, accidents to social stigma, brothels embodied the darker realities of urban life in the Middle Ages. In this chapter, we explore these perils and how people coped with them. First, disease was a constant threat. Sexually transmitted infections, including syphilis in later medieval periods, were widespread. Workers often had little choice but to continue working despite illness, and clients sometimes carried infections unknowingly. To mitigate this, madams implemented rudimentary hygiene practices, herbal washes, clean bedding, and bathing routines. In some cities, authorities even required brothel workers to undergo inspections or treatments, an early, if primitive, form of public health intervention. Despite these measures, the risk of infection remained high, and disease shaped the daily experience of brothel life profoundly. Accidents were another danger. Tight, crowded rooms, slippery floors, and hasty movements could lead to falls or injuries. Some establishments used candles for lighting, which could easily start fires. Animals like cats or dogs, sometimes kept for companionship or pest control, occasionally caused chaos. Workers had to be constantly vigilant, maintaining both personal safety and the safety of clients, demonstrating remarkable coordination, awareness, and resilience. Punishment within brothels was also a serious concern. Workers who broke rules, failing to follow madam instructions, disputing fees, or interacting inappropriately with clients could face public shaming, fines, or temporary suspension. Clients who misbehaved were subject to fines, reporting to authorities, or even physical expulsion from the premises. Madams had to enforce these rules firmly to maintain order, protect workers, and preserve the brothel's reputation. In a sense, brothels were microcosms of justice, where rule enforcement was critical for survival and commerce. Social stigma added a psychological layer of peril. Brothel workers were often marginalized, subject to gossip, harassment, and moral condemnation. Even when legally protected, they faced prejudice from clergy, neighbors, and sometimes family members. This stigma could affect opportunities outside the brothel, making it difficult to leave the trade or integrate fully into society. Yet, workers developed strategies to navigate this pressure, including building networks of support, negotiating discretion with clients, and cultivating personal authority within the brothel. Financial risk also loomed. Workers depended on regular clients, prompt payment, and compliance with municipal regulations. A single incident, accident, illness, or violation of rules could jeopardize income or lead to eviction from the brothel. Madams had to balance enforcement with empathy, ensuring that operations remained profitable while protecting both clients and workers. Interestingly, the dangers of brothel life were often mitigated through community and structure. Experienced workers mentored newcomers, sharing strategies for avoiding illness, handling difficult clients, and negotiating with authorities. Madams maintained strict schedules, hygiene standards, and operational rules. Even in the face of disease, social stigma, and physical danger, the structured environment provided a measure of safety and continuity that isolated workers could rarely achieve alone. In conclusion, medieval brothels were spaces of pleasure and peril. Disease, accidents, punishment, social stigma, and financial risk were ever present, shaping the experience of both workers and clients. Yet, through regulation, community, and strategic adaptation, these dangers were managed, allowing brothels to function as resilient institutions within complex urban societies. Next, we'll examine the interaction between brothels and religion, exploring how churches, clergy, and moral authorities influenced regulation, practice, and public perception in medieval cities. Medieval brothels existed in a world where religion permeated nearly every aspect of life. From city councils to local clergy, moral authorities constantly monitored the delicate balance between vice, commerce, and social order. In this chapter, we explore how religion shaped brothel regulation, influenced the behavior of workers and clients, and affected public perception. First, it's important to recognize that the church's stance on prostitution was complicated and pragmatic. While sexual activity outside of marriage was officially condemned, clergy often tolerated brothels as a necessary evil. The reasoning was simple: if prostitution could be regulated, confined, and taxed, it might reduce adultery, public indecency, and unregulated sexual encounters elsewhere in the city. Brothels, in a sense, served as moral containment zones, where vice was managed rather than left uncontrolled. Religious oversight often took the form of inspection, monitoring, and moral instruction. In some towns, brothel workers were required to attend church, confess regularly, or participate in religious ceremonies. Madams sometimes acted as intermediaries, encouraging compliance with spiritual expectations while maintaining the profitability of their establishments. Workers were caught in a tension between worldly survival and religious obligation, navigating rules designed to satisfy both human need and divine expectation. Clergy occasionally intervened directly in brothel operations. They might mediate disputes, admonish workers or clients, or impose sanctions for moral infractions. In extreme cases, religious authorities called for closures, penances, or fines. However, enforcement was often pragmatic. Fully shutting down prostitution could drive it underground, where disease, crime, and disorder were harder to control. This resulted in a delicate negotiation between ecclesiastical authority and municipal pragmatism. Religious influence also shaped the daily behavior of clients and workers. Certain days of the week, such as holy days, could come with restrictions on operations. Workers might be expected to abstain or modify practices, and clients were often reminded of sin and penance. These rules created a rhythm where pleasure and morality intersected, blending commerce with spiritual oversight. The church's involvement extended to record-keeping and surveillance. Brothels were sometimes required to maintain lists of workers, client interactions, or financial transactions for inspection. Madams had to ensure compliance with both secular and religious authorities. This level of monitoring reinforced the idea that brothels were regulated institutions, not lawless dens, and that morality was a practical concern integrated with urban governance. Interestingly, workers found ways to navigate religious oversight creatively. Some used confession as a tool, confessing transgressions strategically to gain spiritual relief or social protection. Others developed private rituals or alliances with clergy to maintain both safety and livelihood. These practices demonstrate the interplay of personal agency, survival, and moral negotiation within the brothel context. Religious pressure also influenced architecture and operations. In some regions, brothels were built discreetly to avoid public scandal, while still being accessible. Signs, entrances, and room arrangements reflected both practical business needs and moral considerations, creating a spatial balance between visibility, discretion, and oversight. In conclusion, religion and morality were inseparable from the functioning of medieval brothels. Clergy and religious norms influenced rules, behavior, and perception, while workers and madams navigated a complex system balancing survival, profit, and spiritual compliance. Far from chaotic, these establishments were sites where desire, commerce, and moral negotiation intertwined, reflecting the pragmatic, layered reality of medieval urban life. As the Middle Ages progressed, medieval brothels did not remain static. Economic, social, and moral shifts reshaped these institutions, leading to decline, transformation, and adaptation. In this chapter, we explore how changing times influenced brothel operations, worker experiences, and urban regulation, revealing the dynamic nature of this hidden world. One of the first pressures came from religious reform movements. By the late medieval period, clergy and moral authorities increasingly criticized prostitution, linking it to sin, public disorder, and moral decay. Campaigns for moral reform, sometimes spearheaded by influential church leaders, sought to close brothels, restrict their operation, or impose stricter oversight. While fully shutting down the trade proved impractical, these pressures led to increased regulation, fines, and social scrutiny. Madams and workers had to navigate a tighter moral and legal environment, balancing survival with growing disapproval from authorities. Economic changes also played a role. Urban expansion, population shifts, and the rise of alternative forms of entertainment such as taverns, gambling houses, and theatre introduced competition for clients' time and money. Some brothels adapted by diversifying services, improving facilities, or specializing in particular types of clientele. Others could not compete and were forced to close or merge with more successful establishments. These economic dynamics show that medieval brothels were responsive businesses, adjusting to supply, demand, and urban competition. Health crises had a profound impact as well. Outbreaks of plague, syphilis, and other diseases disrupted urban life, reducing client numbers and threatening the health of workers. In response, brothels implemented stricter hygiene practices, limited services temporarily, or adjusted operations to mitigate risk. Authorities sometimes mandated closures during epidemics, highlighting the interconnectedness of public health, regulation, and the survival of brothels. Social attitudes shifted, too. As cities grew, the visibility of brothels became more contentious. Neighborhoods resisted brothel expansion, and public opinion increasingly associated these establishments with crime and disorder. This led to stricter zoning, relocation to less prominent areas, or incorporation of brothels into municipal oversight programs that balanced economic benefit with social control. Madams had to negotiate these pressures carefully, protecting both business and workers from hostility. Despite these challenges, brothels were remarkably resilient. Some evolved into more exclusive, discreet, and sophisticated establishments, catering to wealthier clients or specializing in particular services. Others became part of broader commercial networks, linking with inns, taverns, and urban marketplaces. Workers adapted as well, leveraging experience, networks, and financial acumen to maintain livelihoods even as the broader context changed. The transformation of brothels also left a legacy in urban governance and social policy. Municipal authorities learned to regulate vice pragmatically, balancing moral concerns with economic necessity. This model influenced later approaches to managing entertainment, nightlife, and sex work, highlighting the medieval capacity for pragmatic social negotiation. In conclusion, medieval brothels were not static or monolithic. They responded to moral, economic, and health pressures, adapting operations, spaces, and practices over time. Workers, madams, and authorities navigated shifting social landscapes, demonstrating resilience, negotiation, and strategic adaptation. The story of decline and transformation reveals that these institutions were dynamic, complex, and deeply embedded in the urban fabric of the Middle Ages. Next, in our final chapter, we'll explore the broader cultural and historical legacy of medieval brothels, examining how they shaped perceptions, social norms, and even modern understanding of sex work. After exploring the women, madams, clients, economics, rules, hygiene, religion, paroles, and transformations of medieval brothels, it's time to step back and examine their broader cultural and historical impact. What can these hidden institutions teach us about medieval society, human behavior, and the regulation of desire? First, medieval brothels left a lasting imprint on urban governance. Authorities learned that attempting to eliminate vice entirely was impractical. Instead, regulation, oversight, and negotiation produced more effective outcomes. This pragmatic approach influenced later urban policies, from controlling public entertainment to regulating nightlife and sex work in emerging modern cities. In other words, medieval brothels helped shape early frameworks for managing human behavior in complex societies. The legacy of madams and workers is equally significant. Women running or working in brothels demonstrated entrepreneurial skill, social negotiation, and community building. They navigated rules, protected themselves, and sometimes accumulated wealth or influence, challenging the notion that medieval women were passive or powerless. These stories remind us that historical narratives often overlook resilience, strategy, and agency in marginalized populations. Culturally, brothels influenced literature, art, and folklore. References to brothel life appear in medieval poetry, plays, and chronicles, often highlighting both moral caution and fascination with urban vice. These portrayals reflect society's complex relationship with sexuality, simultaneously stigmatized, tolerated, and commercially significant. They also influenced modern depictions of sex work, contributing to enduring myths, stereotypes, and intrigue surrounding pleasure and morality. Brothels also shaped public health and hygiene practices. Although limited by contemporary medical knowledge, regulations for bathing, room cleanliness, and disease management provided early examples of structured approaches to communal health risks. In a sense, these institutions anticipated later urban public health measures, demonstrating that necessity can drive innovation in unexpected areas. From an economic perspective, brothels contributed to tax revenue, employment, and urban commerce. Workers, madams, and suppliers formed interconnected networks that sustained livelihoods, circulated money, and influenced local markets. This integration into the urban economy that even marginalized institutions can have systemic importance, highlighting the complexity of medieval economic life. Socially, brothels acted as mirrors of societal norms and tensions. They reflected gender hierarchies, moral expectations, and the negotiation between law, religion, and personal desire. They were spaces where agency, coercion, negotiation, and regulation intersected, offering insights into human behavior and societal management that remain relevant today. Finally, studying medieval brothels challenges our assumptions about the past. These were not chaotic dens of sin, they were regulated, complex institutions where women exercised agency, madams managed operations, clients navigated rules, and authorities balanced morality with pragmatism. The lessons extend beyond history, understanding how societies manage vice, labor, and risk can inform modern approaches to regulation, labor rights, and social policy. In conclusion, medieval brothels were far more than dens of pleasure. They were microcosms of urban life, reflecting commerce, law, morality, and human resilience. They shaped governance, influenced culture, and left a legacy that continues to inform our understanding of society, economy, and human behavior. By examining these hidden worlds, we gain a richer, more nuanced appreciation for the complexity, creativity, and pragmatism of medieval urban life. And with that, our journey behind the walls comes to an end, illuminating a world of rules, resilience, and humanity that history often overlooked, yet which shaped the medieval city in profound and lasting ways. Next, we'll examine the decline, transformation, and legacy of brothels, exploring how economic, social, and moral changes reshaped this hidden yet vital part of medieval society.